All right, here is my full presentation for week 13. I hope that the instrumental music will not be too distracting, but my kids are very distracting, so I'm hoping it'll cover up the sound of my children. Um, so my presentation is based on the question, what is worth teaching? And as I thought about that then and really delved into the reading that we had over the last couple of weeks, I was just inspired to learn about the different issues that have faced our nation in education over the last even 100 years, but even closer to, the time of Lyndon B. Johnson in the 60s and all of the things that he did for education. So I really wanted to kind of think about that concept. And so my first question is, how can we deconstruct the narrative and issues to build something that will raise all people? And as I reread this question, I realized it's a pretty arbitrary question if you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I think some of the narrative is that education started first with people who could afford it, and typically those were white Americans. And then, the narrative moved on to um, different states adopting public education. Then every state adopted public education, and then there was a division between white schools and schools for any other minority. And, as we've seen throughout all of the reforms, we've still seen this kind of division of education, even though all of our attempts have moved us towards trying to reform school, reform education, and give everyone an equal playing field. It hasn't worked. And it's working better and better, but it's not perfect yet. And so, how can we give our students a perspective of what they have and what maybe some of the obstacles are that they're going up against if they're in an inner city school or a poor district, and then how can we define that for their parents and for the citizens in the community and for the state at the state level. That if I feel like education is such a huge issue, and I don't think it's going to be limited to our classroom, at least for me. I know it won't be limited to my classroom. It will be parents and community and legislators, and I'm going to fight for these kids. And so for me, that's kind of the direction this presentation took. What is it worth? Um, so I came across this quote for a different assignment that I was working on for my history class, and I just loved it, and I wanted to share it because I think it really helps to buoy us up a little bit and give us a little bit more perspective. It says, "To know what has come before us is to be armed against despair. If the men and women of the past with all their flaws and limitations and ambitions and appetites could press on through ignorance and superstition, racism and sexism, selfishness and greed to create a freer, stronger nation, then perhaps we, too, can right wrongs and take another step toward that most enchanting and elusive destination, a more perfect union." I just love that idea. And we really have come a long way, and we have a long way to go, and I'm not sure the right way to go about it, but I know that we can do it. Okay, my question number 2. Is there a place for matriarchy in the classroom? This is kind of a funny question, but in my biology class, we talked about the difference between a patriarchal or a matriarchal society, and what really the ideal is for us as members of the church. And what was taught in the class was that we as a church really are both matriarchy and patriarchal, working together, bringing our best efforts forward, and then sharing with each other. So, so in this way, there's no like top dog, right? It's a men and women working together. So what do I mean for that in the classroom? What I really mean for that in the classroom is that when I studied patriarchal societies, there was kind of a top-down leadership mentality, and when I studied matriarchal societies, there was sort of a community rising together society. And I wonder how well that would work in a classroom. I don't know what that looks like. It feels to me like it would look something like the Come Follow Me program, but I don't really know. So I kind of looked into it, and I went to this website, and it's linked in my slide, where she talks about in her classroom how she works through kind of teaching kids about how to work together in a classroom. And I have, her 5 points on there, so you're welcome to look at that on the slide, but I highly recommend going to her URL. My next question is, how can we bring popular movements and other big issues safely into the conversation with our students? One of the things that I studied this week in, well, it could have been in my education class or my history class, but was the Black Lives Matter movement. And I went to the website, Black Lives Matter, and I read the premise for their movement, which is basically to bring awareness that all lives matter, whether they're black or white, or whether they're people of a minority, or whether they are LGBTQ, whatever, they all matter and they all have something to offer. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So how can we bring awareness about things like that into the classroom? In science alone, I have a ton of things that are going to be a little bit controversial, especially in the high percentage, high population LDS community that I plan on teaching. Evolution, global warming, plate tectonics, the age of the earth, all of these things are going to be really controversial in my classroom. And I want to do it in a way that really teaches the kids how to respect each other, how to respect themselves and their opinions, how to communicate those in a way that is effective and educated. And so I'm kind of excited about it. What I learned about it this week, I was grateful for Tatiana's input. She said, make sure that you are communicating that all lives matter. And that was kind of based on that Black Lives Matter movement. But really, it's just this idea of communicating, I think, effective communication. And how do we stay calm? How do we, when we see a roadblock, how are we overcoming that roadblock? How are we moving through it and teaching our kids to move through it? So that's really what I learned about and kind of delved into this week. And I'll post some of those links in the presentation as well. And then finally, as I was going through this week, I really struggled. I struggled with the hardships that students have had to live with. There was one reading that we read this week, and it talked about, I think it was reading number, well, I wouldn't even be able to tell you, but they talked about how this training, this lady was coming in to do a training in a school, and all the teachers were in this classroom to be trained, and there was pure chaos outside. The kids were like ringing the bells, and they were taunting other students. They were getting in fights, and nobody could handle them. And they talked about what an exhausting place it was. And we may think, well, that's not how it is now, but that's not accurate. there's still places where it's a struggle like that every day for teachers. I pulled up several, um, where their kids might not even make it to 8th grade. I pulled up several different teachers on the internet. Currently, 2019, their kids might not make it to 8th grade because of drugs or sex or gangs, and because of their family life, and because they're in the inner city and it's just not safe for them. So what are we going to do, and how can we overcome all of the things when it seems hopeless? We've been working at this for so long. As I started to feel like that, then I felt really sad, and I felt really chaotic. And then I opened up a conference talk and I started to read it. And I wasn't even reading it to find peace, but I did. I found peace. I know that there is peace in Christ. And if I guess I'm leaving this note for myself, because I want myself to remember when I am going through the thick of it for my kids, and for the things that they need to learn, and for the struggles that I'm having with them and with their parents, or with the school district or with the state. I want to remember where I can find peace. So that's why this is my final slide. There is peace in Christ, because I know that when I read the scriptures, and when I read the conference talks, and when I go to church, and when I bear my testimony, when I take the sacrament, when I say my prayers, and when I sing the beautiful music, I find peace. So that's my last note to myself for this class, and hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.